So we have this cool little yellow Integra built down at Butler Automotive for Lowe to do the production car series in. They've put together a spicy little K24.
What? Bro, what are you talking about, man?
With high compression, camshafts, Toyota ITVs, all the stuff that every Honda fanboy ever wants. So we are just about to perform another run-in. Again, this is a big part of our day, just getting the cars actually started and running and run them in before we can actually do anything cool with them. We're gonna start with some light load stuff, then get into some heavy load, go run through the gears, again make sure we've got no leaks and everything like that before we can make some boo-bar noises. Make all the cool fire and all the other things that everyone wants. It should be quite a good little car. I'm kind of predicting somewhere around the 200 kilowatt NA mark. I think this is going to be a really competitive little car, 5-stud conversion, Brembos, all the stuff, so I really hope that Lowe takes out Class A, and hopefully we can make some good power with this one. It's not blowing.
What fuel pressure you got there?
What, fuel pressure?
Yeah. It should be displaying now because JP fixed it.
Yeah, 4.4 bar.
It comes through. Look, that's its main starter wire. That wire here. The vehicle's not starting because the wire that is in this harness is puny. It's a 5mm wire. And general factory, I think they're like a 12mm or a 13mm squared wire running in factory. So when we're cranking, it's drawing all the current and the voltage is dropping and the computer's not seeing any voltage. And all the crank sensors and the cam sensors all run off 12 volts. So when they drop voltage, ECU sees nothing. So this is the starter feed wire. I've just pulled off the starter motor. So this is the big boy wire that usually comes from your battery that's up here that goes to the starter to supply all the current to make the engine turn while it's starting. And I'd say that's probably like a 5mm cable in there. This is the size cable that we generally use. Big boy 50mm. Do a short test. Big cable versus little cable.
What I'm doing, I'm pretty much tricking the car to think that it has a big lump of cam in it, using ignition timing. So all it's doing is that this car has no idle control on it, so it purely uses ignition timing to set the idle. So what I'm doing is that it's always trying to correct itself by adding timing and pulling timing away to get to the target idle of whatever you've got it set at. So if you've got it set at say 1000 RPM, just as a round number, you can make it, usually as it gets closer to that target, it will start reducing that timing correction back to 0. So, you know, if you're 100 RPM out and it might be, say you're 100 RPM above your target, that will say start pulling 2% out. So what I'm doing is that I make it more aggressive, so pull say 5-6 degrees out and then add 6 degrees, so it will never find its 0 point. It's always jumping between it, which gives it that lumpy cam idle. It's a common trick that all tuners use, just to pretty much just trick it. So if you guys want that nice lumpy idle, just give it a rev and it's just straight back to that lumpiness. With the Platinum plug-and-play ECU, so we've swapped it out for an Elite. Just means I need to go through and probably do some of my partials, because this is an ITV car. We're running map pressure with 40 mapping for the TPS, so I just need to get my close to 0, well close to atmospheric manifold pressure map as close as possible, just so I can get an idea of what the shape is, and then I can start overlaying my TPS map. Because I haven't done that, it's the actual map is quite rich. Powers, you know, we should be able to find another 10 kilowatts just by leading this out, so just need to get those pictures right, and then it should be all good. just working on knock threshold, so listening to what the natural noise of the engine is or what the knock sensor is picking up, and then setting the knock threshold for the mapping suit, so if it does see any spikes of pre-detonation or knock or anything like that, it will pick up on it at full time. It also helps tuning, just trying to get close to that knock limit, but we don't want to get too close to it. The reason why we're running it in this car is because it's quite high compression and I don't want it to blow up. Just doing an inspection on Kess's engine. Tony here's pulling it down. Unfortunately, so the rule of thumb is really when you are talking about bearings and crank surfaces and things like that, if you can feel it on your fingernail, it's already too deep. And on some of the main caps there, we've got a lot of scoring. On the inside here, it doesn't look so bad on the top sides, but say for instance number 4 I just looked at, it's got some pretty bad scoring in it. And I can feel that on the crankshaft, the female version of those grooves. So now we kind of have to make a decision here, because this was always it was like a standard bottom end, but now we're kind of going to make the decision. We're probably going to end up having to machine the crank or get another bottom end depending on what Kess wants to do. But it's now not a case of just refreshing the engine and just putting some new bearings in it for the new season, because there's no point putting it back together how it is. Otherwise, we could just end up with more problems. So, unfortunately, Mr. Keske, you're going to have to start saving your yen.
All the white metal's gone off that.
Yeah, and there's an impact mark right there.
Yeah, the outer side.
Yeah, see, that's another cool one. That's the last cap. And I can't remember which round it was, but we had a massive clutch failure. Was that Bay Park, I think? Manfield, that's right. Where we completely fried the clutch. We could see it in the logs that the clutch was starting to slip. And Keske, being Keske, said he was going to send it and completely melted the clutch. Funny thing is, on these last caps, you will always see on a car that's had a massive clutch burnout, especially in the motorsport applications, where it'll start heating up the bearing if it gets so bad. So that one's been cooked by a clutch failure. Hey Kelly, do you want to donate an engine? Your car's never going to go again.
How much are we talking? 20 grand. Cash. A couple of SR20s will buy a premium before race course.
Yeah, probably.
So, as you would have seen, insert clip or picture or whatever we've got here, this car was absolutely totaled. The front end was pushed up, the driver's side chassis rail even actually ejecto-cetoed the headlight. It was sticking up that high, and then to top it off, the car whipped around and did the back end. So Nathan has spent hours and hours and hours putting this thing back together after Infinity Group put it on the chassis machine. This band here.
So yeah, the car started, well, you guys all know how it started, when it was crashed at Bay Park. But yeah, so I've taken it back to the chassis rail where it wasn't kinked. So on that side over there, there was a big kink in the chassis rail. So I've gotten rid of that kink, which is obviously a weak point, and then restructured the rear of the car. Yeah, as you see it, it's pretty tough, and I'd say it'll probably take a hit or two now without sucking them into the wall like the original panels did. Because obviously there was no structure back here originally, so what happened when he crashed was this collapsed
and that sucked the back of the car into the wall, which then dropped the front of the car over the edge of the track and slapped his front as well. So Kes decided to do something a little bit more of his flavour, and he wanted to put a NASCAR fuel cell in it, so Nathan's actually even modified that up to fit in it, which is over here. So it has a legitimate NASCAR tank in it with a bladder. So I think we should start a new thing and start calling him the Japanese Ricky Bobby from now on.
Everything ended up fine.
And Nathan can go a bit more in depth than I can about exactly what he's done. I've recreated the kind of structure point, but also tied in the chassis rails. So instead of just having two chassis rails that are obviously tied together with all the panel steel on the back of a car, instead I've gone for a looped chassis rail system, which encloses the fuel cell. And so what that does is keeps the fuel cell nice and safe. It gives me a point to build a jacking point off. So I've clicked on a jacking point here, which means that the rear bumper bar is literally just for the rear bumper. It means that if you take the rear bumper off, it takes a knock or something, you're not compromising anything that we can still do with the car. We can still jack it up, the fuel cell's still safe, the rear is still together, like you can still bolt panels on, things like that. So to tie in the boot lid, because K decided that he wanted to go from a steel boot lid to a fiberglass boot lid. I'm not sure, just because of ease of replacement or whatever, but we've gone to a pin system. So instead of using the factory latches, I've actually de-pinned them from inside the car and run a set of bonnet pins essentially on all four corners. So I've tied it in with this 20mm tube using a tie rod system that I've made. So there's a tie rod link there. There's the obviously bonnet pin link here, bonnet pin link here, and then across here you've got a almost like a cam lock that I've just done on the 20mm tube, and that connects the two pieces side by side together, so it's nice, structural, nice and strong. It also means that if this does take a knock, or for any reason whatsoever you need to remove something from that corner of the car, these will come out, and they'll come out really easy. Everything just unbolts, comes out of the boot, and then you can have the whole rear end of the car with, you know, a couple of riv nuts drilled out apart in like 5-10 minutes. So that makes serviceability a lot easier this time around. Coming down, so it's a little bit hard to see because I've already started mocking up. So these are aluminium panels, will connect up into the wheel arch, but on the bumper bar I have done a similar setup with my little rods where these 2 points are connected together via a rod system. And what that allows for is fatigue, essentially. So if the car takes a knock in the corner, instead of pushing all that energy through that bumper bar to this chassis rail, essentially, you've got a fatigue point. This either bends, breaks, slides up out of the way, bends down, snaps the bolts, because we're using really low-grade bolts for all the stuff that connects just the bumper bar to the chassis of the car, so that actually fatigues first. And then the bumper bar itself, the main points, are held on with a cam lock roll cage interlinking system, which is pretty cool. These things are from a guy down the line. If you look underneath, they're held together with 2 cap screws. So the 2 cap screws just there. And then what you can do is take those 2 cap screws out. They've got a cam lock inside of them, which means that you could unbolt it completely. The thing will still stay there, and then you just lift it up and off the locks, and the whole bumper bar comes off. And this sits up nice and tight into the rear bumper as well. So if it does take a hit, hopefully it doesn't, you know, damage any of the fiberglass behind the bumper. But yeah, the whole rear end came together like OEM. You know, the boot sits on as it should. The lights line up. K wanted to replace this rear cowling with a fiberglass one, so we've actually had the spot welds drilled out and then replaced this whole rear panel with a removable fiberglass one, which means if it takes a knock or it gets damaged, or I don't know, someone sits on it too hard, then you can take it off and replace it, which is cool. That pretty much wraps up the rear of the car at the moment. We've started, like I said, we've started doing paneling on the inside. And this will all be made out of aluminium and just bolted in, which means if it does take a knock or a hit or something, it's easily just removed instead of having to cut it all out. And that will also close up our wheel arches as well, so that we don't get any rubber, dirt, smoke, you know, just track crap into the boot. Also keeps it away from being a fire hazard.
Okay, so the front end of Kizko's car was not as hard to create as the back end because there wasn't actually too much damage to the chassis itself. So I didn't have to tube frame the front of the car. So a lot of people thought that we'd have to take it off of the strut towers, we'd have to remake all the tubs, restructure all down here, which is a very common practice, and especially with drift cars, makes serviceability nice and easy. But Todd and the guys at Infinity Works spent quite a bit of time on making the front end straight again. So they got the chassis rails fairly linear, which was cool, which meant that when it came back here and we kind of started to develop a bit of a plan to build the front end again, I suggested why don't we just cap the chassis rail. So under here is actually original chassis rail to about here, and then the rest is new box steel. But what I did was I took that cap all the way back to create almost like a new chassis rail each side, and then that's just stitched, well, it's full welded into the chassis, so that's nice and solid. And then JP stressed to me that he really wanted the front caster bracket bar to be removable this time, which makes a little bit of sense when you've got to take motor in and out quite often. Being able to remove that front caster bar and have the whole front end of the car open enough to be able to slide the engine out on the subframe if need be. It's very easy to pull this car apart. So yeah, what I did was I recreated the caster bracket bar, but using M12 bolts and welded nuts on the inside. So I've created an original kind of bolt situation where everything just winds in. You don't have to have a spanner on one side and a spanner on the other side. So it's really easy to work on. Coming forward from that, I have, it's a little bit hard to see, but I've built a bumper bar straight off the front of my new chassis rails there. And that comes up and supports the bumper here. The bumper bar, the only extra thing the bumper bar supports is the oil cooler down in here. So it was just easy to mount the oil cooler off the bumper bar because where the oil cooler was originally here, it wasn't going to work this time. With dash 10 lines, there's just actually nowhere to run it now that we've stood both the radiator and the intercooler up. So by losing the V-mount setup, which is a real cool setup, but to work properly, especially for the type of driving this car's doing, it's going sideways. So there's not a bunch of air rushing in, you know, the air's kind of coming this way. So it's better to have everything stood up to try and get a little bit better cooling. The only way that the car was being kept cool before with the V-mount stuff was having an extra aluminium duct and also water sprayers to keep the intercooler and the radiator cold, which was a system that kept breaking down and they had issues with it, and it did stop a few things for the season last time.
These big springs seem to be shit. Yeah, what's a better pin?
Here's hoping we've solved that issue by standing everything up, going to a nice big radiator that takes up that whole mouth space, and I'll explain what I've done there in a sec as well. But yeah, so moving on from that bumper bar that comes up and supports the bumper, I've developed again another removable top bar. So again, it's got pull-throughs on the other side that are actually stitch welded to the chassis, and what that means is you can bolt it in on and off without having to again put a spanner behind the back. This whole bar supports both the top end of the chassis, supports the headlights, the radiator, the top of the intercooler, and obviously the fog lights as well. That headlight bar will have, I'm calling it a headlight bar, but it's kind of like a radiator support. That will have a nice aluminium plate that bolts in the top for both aesthetic and also to direct a little bit more airflow through to the radiator instead of it diverting up and over the radiator through the bonnet, because obviously you can see the bonnet here goes up and along. So a lot of that cold air would just be coming in, running up along here and straight out the bonnet vent, whereas we want to try and keep it down towards the radiator. So moving on from there, I've got new headlight brackets. Kizko really wanted to run the original fog lights that come in the car. It's a pretty cool look, and with the original mounts and everything like that, it just made everything tight, especially going to a larger radiator and also a custom top bar. So I've remade out of steel and stainless a nice headlight bracket that both mounts the headlight and the fog light to the top of the radiator support bar. These gussets. Again, everything comes apart nice and easily. Everything's just one bolt away, no nut situation, which makes it nice and quick at the track. All the bolt holes that are in the car are actually to spec which means if it's an M6 bolt, it's got just over an M6 sized hole, which means that there's no need for washers. When you're pulling apart a car at a racetrack, the last thing you want is to be losing washers all over the floor, not being able to, you know, put something back together because the bolt is actually too big for the hole and it needed a washer to find its surface. So I've made everything, you know, as tight on the clearances as I can. And then engine bay looking kind of this way. I've built a new radiator, so it's actually a Volkswagen Golf core from Phoenix. Cut the end tanks off of it, designed up new end tanks and welded them to the radiator core. I've triple passed it because of the way we're going to run the radiator. It's going to have a water neck up the top here, and it's going to have a water neck down the bottom here. So I couldn't just do a single pass, it needed to be 3 pass. So it's got a slit and a pass there and a slit and a pass here. And then that is supported to this bar with rubbered mounts, which takes the vibration out, and it also slots into some mounting points that I've made off of the caster bracket bar down the bottom, and that will have a rubber pad or matting on the inside so that the radiator will be void of all vibration coming from an SR20. As everyone knows, SR20s are pretty unbalanced and they do create quite a lot of harmonic. So we wanted to try and avoid everything cracking or damaging stuff, especially the radiator, the oil cooler. The intercooler not so much, the intercooler can be hard mounted, but your radiator and your oil cooler are the 2 main components that you want to try and soft mount so that they don't have early fatigue, I guess, or get damaged or whatever. It's a little bit hard to see, but under the front of the car there's all the bracketry to support the intercooler, to support the bottom of the oil cooler, to support the radiator, and again it's all, you know, freshly made. It all unbolts. So yeah, the big point of, I guess, what I'm stressing is the whole front end of the car, the whole rear end of the car comes apart in about 10-15 minutes. You could have this car pulled down to a shell again pretty fast if anything needs to be adjusted or changed or remade or rebuilt. Everything's fairly rebuildable. So a lot of the design stuff is just in my head. I never actually drew it up. I sketched it, but I never drew it up properly. I measured twice, cut once, as they say. But yeah, it's like 2 months and counting, so less than.
The next day.
So as you saw earlier with Kess's engine, we decided, because we still had a little bit of time left, to completely strip it down. We were pretty happy with the piston condition and all that, but we decided, since we had still a little bit of time, we were waiting for the body to get finished, still got to go away to get painted and whatnot, to completely do a full tear down. And what we did actually find was a little bit of scoring on the mains on the crankshaft. We would rather either send it away to get the crank machined, or turns out Kess actually had a spare engine. So he's given us this engine here, which actually looks like it has had a good freshen up as of recently. The block surface is actually quite nice. Everything's had a fresh VHT rebuild. And everything on it actually looks pretty new. So what we're going to do is we're going to make a good engine out of 2, and then what we'll end up doing is the bad engine, we will piece it together and actually get it all machined with new bearings and all that sort of stuff. So we've got a second motor. We're actually lucky in this case, because this engine had some type of timing failure from when it was running the last time, and all that had happened to it is 8 valves out of the valve train had touched the pistons and it was just enough to bend the valve heads. So I think with this we're going to be pretty lucky in regards to there won't be much cleanup or anything to do on that one. We're still going to pull the bottom end apart and just inspect the bearings, inspect the oil pump and all that type of stuff, but I think we're actually pretty good to go. We'll just put a head together and slap it on and send it. Kess gets a fresh new motor, I guess, for the next season. The last motor actually survived pretty well, but we also did find that there was one valve in the engine that was a little bit unhappy on the original setup, and all the valve guides were worn out, probably due to being cold started and happy feeded from the line off the trailer.
Oh yeah?
Who knows. So we're going to try and make something a little bit more bulletproof for him, and this season we want to repeat what happened last season, and that's just have no mechanical failures, which is what we always aim for. Yeah, I think we should be able to make a bit more power too, because it looks like turbo care's come on board, and we're going to get a new, more modern turbo instead of the old 3-volt TD06, so that should be quite cool. Well, that is our first episode. So we've gone through some dynoing, Kess's car, and really just some problems that, you know, happen on a day-to-day basis with, you know, cars coming in that have been built other places or built at home, and that type of thing. And I really hope you enjoyed it. We tried to show you guys sort of what happens when things... Sorry,
Yeah.
I just have to make noise really briefly, otherwise I'm going to be stuck for a little while. Give me like 2 minutes, okay? After that rude interruption from Nathan, what I was talking about is, yeah, everything that comes in the door, obviously we do a basic checks, but because they've been assembled somewhere else, there's always going to be something like a leak, or could be anything. But that's just how it is. And you know, with the dyno stuff, we generally trying to provide value for the customer, right? So we want to be able to show you guys that in an in-depth and a non-glorified way. It's just raw. It's how it happens every day. So I really hope you guys enjoyed that part of it. And also, I really want to know what you guys actually want to see from us. You know, we're new to this. This is all something that we've never done before. So if you guys want to see more engine building stuff, if you guys want to see more dyno stuff, if you want to see more fab stuff, I will try and get Jeremy in front of the camera. We call him our workshop wizard. He hasn't let any smoke out of any wires yet, but he's been pretty good so far. But you know, if you want to see some wiring stuff or some ECU calibration stuff, anything you want, let us know, and we'll actually film it in a way where it's going to be transparent. You know, we're not here to hide anything. We just want to give you guys some raw automotive content of what happens here in New Zealand, and I really hope you guys can sort of follow along as we grow this channel with Garage Ponies. Pierce is behind the camera, and enjoy it. Keep sharing it, and we'll go from there. Thank you everyone, and I really hope you enjoyed this first episode. So effectively we legitimately just ran out of gas.
Wasn't this engine just ridiculous?
And like